Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad. I am co-hosting this third installment of In Defense of Academic Freedom, Defamation, Intimidation, and Suspension with my partner in crime, Mariam Durrani. I will introduce her in just a moment, and she will kick off the conversation. This is the third installment of In Defense of Academic Freedom, co-sponsored by a number of organizations that we will address as we move forward so we can get to the conversation. The assault on academic freedom is growing dramatically, as we have been witnessing on university campuses, and now has actually included a new dimension since the last time we had this event, which is the second installment, which is basically the student encampments. We are launching the series to address the cases of defamation, intimidation, and suspension that faculty are being subjected to in the United States and beyond. We are also going to be addressing the question of repression of student protests very soon. This particular series aims to raise awareness of the conditions and pretenses under which such violations occur and provide resources to contend with them, not least in support of the most vulnerable targets. This particular installment, we are very fortunate to be joined by Jodi Dean and Mohamed Abdou. In this conversation, they will be addressing how they were either suspended or relieved of their teaching duties for the support of Palestine in today's Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza. They will tell their own story and address the context of their scholarship and advocacy, as well as how their academic freedom was violated. And it merits to say that they are not alone. We are witnessing a growing number of faculty members being targeted, smeared, defamed, and suspended for reasons that are entirely unreasonable, considering the kind of content that is being shared under the pretense of academic freedom. We are experiencing nothing less than a historic moment, not just in terms of the genocide in Gaza, but also in terms of what is happening on U.S. campuses and within the U.S. polity itself. We will be addressing these issues, starting with Jody, but first let me introduce my partner, Mariam, who will basically launch the conversation. Mariam Durrani is a professional lecturer, is a professorial. I corrected myself, Mariam, this time. A professorial lecturer at the School of International Service and a faculty affiliate with the Anti-Racism Research and Policy Center at American University. As a decolonial feminist anthropologist, Dr. Durrani's scholarship seeks to shift how academia, media, and public discourse reflect on and reckon with the racialized Muslim subject and the impact of global wars on higher education in the US and Pakistan. First, let me just say hello, everybody. How are you doing? I know you're not sleeping, Mohammed.
Well, alhamdulillah, given 531 years of genocide here and ongoing genocide in Gaza, alhamdulillah.
Jody, you're muted.
It's very stressful, but the support of comrades and friends and family really makes it bearable.
Hala. Mariam, how about you? I'll let you take over.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Bassam. Hi, Jody. Hi, Mohammed. Nice to be here with all of you. And hi to everyone who is joining in and watching the stream today. And we'll be watching it in the future as this will be archived online. Such an important moment, I think, for all of us to come together and as faculty kind of collectively identify how we and students and staff are dealing with this repression on college campuses and how it's showing up in particular in situated ways for each of us. But there's also this logic that kind of governs the larger system that's targeting faculty. And so I have the privilege today to introduce Jody. Jody Dean is professor of politics at Hobart William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York. a political theorist. She is the author or editor of 14 books, including Democracy and Other Neoliberal Fantasies, The Communist Horizon, Crowds and Party, Comrade, an essay on political belonging, and Organized Fight Win, Black Communist Women's Political Writing, co-edited with Jerry's Burden-Stelly. So I would love to invite you, Jody, to share about what your experiences have been so far with regards to, your extramural speech being kind of targeted and identified in particular ways, and how you're kind of dealing with the fallout since and moving forward.
First, thank you, Mariam and Bassam, so much for having me on, and full solidarity with Mohamed, who I'm really happy to get to meet, even though I wish we had been able to meet in other circumstances. And so also I want to also express solidarity with Mohamed Abdou, who's a graduate student at Cornell, who's also been suspended, and in part for his leadership roles in the Cornell what is it called, Coalition for Mutual Liberation, and their work on the encampment. So I teach at a liberal arts college. It's a small liberal arts college in Geneva, New York, called Hobart and William Smith. I've been there 30 years. I've been there 30 years as a pretty known left faculty member. I've been an activist in environmental struggles around gas pipelines and climate change. I've been an activist around sort of repressive policing and Black Lives Matter all in the summer of 2020. And I've an active member. I'm a pretty active left member of the faculty and the community. And this is sort of my profile. Most of my books, particularly my last 3 or 4 books, are in a communist vein. They contribute to communist ideas in political theory. And on April 9th, my long-term publisher, Verso, published a blog post that I wrote called Palestine Speaks for Everyone. And the idea was to hold up the liberation struggle and the metaphors for freedom that appear so frequently in the Palestinian struggle for liberation throughout history. And so, 20th century history. And so I wanted to hold that up, and what happened, and I should also add, I did not put my institutional name on the article. On the one hand, it's part of my academic speech because this is my regular publisher, and I'm engaged in discussions with contemporary philosophers and political theorists like Judith Butler and Hélène Badiou. On the other hand, I didn't identify the institution, so it's clear that it's what I'm saying. And then on April 11th, it seems that some very intense Zionist groups on Twitter found my piece and started going after me. I noticed when all the hate emails started. Then they doxed me on someone's account with my office phone number and email address and those of the president of my institution, and I think probably members of the board of trustees or others in the institution. And then they started attacking all the social media of Hobart and William Smith, like making a bunch of vile comments, saying that Hobart William Smith needs to get rid of this horrible anti-Semite, meaning me, which was shocking. And I should also add that this happened on the same day that the colleges launched a $400 million capital campaign. So the timing from the perspective of the colleges was likely quite bad. And then the next day, Friday, the president of the colleges began the faculty meeting with roughly a 5-minute condemnation of me. I've been there 30 years. I've never seen anything like it. And actually, I didn't see it then. I missed the meeting, and someone texted me like, he's condemning you and saying everything that you said is repugnant, which I have to say, to me, is not a good example of a model of free inquiry and creative discussion, because usually that's not the way we begin our engagements with articles or pieces written by faculty member, whether in an academic journal or in another space. The next day, he called me into the office and read me the letter, now with an additional paragraph that says, and he is relieving Professor Dean from her classroom obligations or classroom duties, pending an investigation to make sure that there's no possibility that anyone may have been harmed by my speech. So the letter makes it seem as if there's been no complaint, but they're looking for the possibility of a complaint. And now, just to add the icing here, he sends this letter to every student, every parent, every staff member, every member of the faculty, and every alum. And so then this quickly spreads all over it spreads quite rapidly all over social media. And so it was a pretty shocking event.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of just stunned by the sequence of how that played out, especially with like a faculty meeting to stand up and to kind of like publicly, target a faculty member, which of course Mohammed can also speak to kind of like what that looks like at a national congressional level, right? In terms of this very particular way of individually kind of like condemning, intimidating everyone else from even the possibility of speaking. It's very kind of like shocking, actually, kind of like the way that the institution is really showing in all these ways.
Thank you, Jody, very much. We'll come back to you with the questions. We'll all have a conversation, and perhaps we'll even take some questions from the various platforms we're on. Let me introduce Mohamed Abdou. Mohamed Abdou is a North African Egyptian. Well, you all have to be ready because this is a long sentence. Mohamed Abdou is a North African Egyptian Muslim anarchist interdisciplinary activist scholar. He is the Arcapita visiting assistant professor of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies, MESAS, at Columbia University. He completed his postdoctoral fellowship at Cornell University and is a former assistant professor at the American University of Cairo. He is author of Islam and Anarchism, Relationships and the Resonances from 2022 Pluto Press. He wrote his transnational ethnographic and his historical archival PhD dissertation on Islam and queer Muslims, Identity and Sexuality in the Contemporary in 2019. We are very happy to have you join us, Mohamed. I will give you the floor, and then we will continue with the questions and a conversation.
First of all, thank you, Bassam. Thank you, Mariam and Jadalia. It's an honor to be with you all, as well as you, Jody. And I'm sorry for everything that is happening to all of us, including our students, Mamadou, including my and our students here at Columbia, facing suspensions, evictions, persecution. I usually start anything that in terms of public speaking, with a small dua or a small prayer, and that is Musa's prayer in the Quran. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم اشرح لي صدري, O Creator, open thy breast, ويسر لي أمري, and make my affairs easy. واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي, and undo the knot of my tongue such that what it is that I have to share with you all becomes accessible to you and the audience. And I'm not engaging in what I'm about to say as a form of superficial rhetoric, but I live on Lenin and Ape territory, and that becomes very important to the context of what it is that I ostensibly have to share with you all, and why I've been constituted, or my story, as some kind of a threat. We're talking, as I noted, 531 years of settler colonialism here, and certainly an ongoing genocide that is happening in Gaza, but also a genocide that is going here, and afterlife to slavery projects, stand your ground laws, school to prison pipelines, Saadia Hartman had referred to it. Now, insofar as my story, in the US, supposedly, we have First Amendment protected rights. It seems that does not figure into the equation when we're particularly talking about Palestine, or we're talking about stolen land here. When we are perhaps questioning, do we live in an American democracy? Do we live in an American nightmare, as Malcolm X had called it? And those rights get thrown out of the window. Freedom of speech, assembly, of religion. As an interdisciplinary scholar, and thank you for that introduction, Bassam, I was hired at Columbia I started my job in January. And I was hired actually last May. I was teaching at Zionist land grab Cornell, and I'm not saying that to be facetious, but Cornell is invested in the genocide vis-a-vis Zionist genocide, vis-a-vis companies as Technion, paramilitary sort of, or extension of the paramilitary industrial complex. And it's a land grab university because underneath the Morrill Act, it stole over 1 million acres of indigenous land to 250 nations that were displaced. So the Archipelago Fellowship, technically speaking, I was offered this opportunity in May of last year. And I started teaching in January. And as a scholar, I was hired by Columbia to teach based on my expertise, to be critical, to challenge, and to be challenged by my students. That is part of my collective unlearning, growth, maturing, and so on. And my expertise extends from everything from comparative settler colonial studies to Islamic studies. I tantamount to minored in Jewish studies, queer studies, gender studies, post-colonial studies, decolonial abolitionist studies. I've taught in indigenous land education and Black geographies. In my work, I usually take 1492 as an important historical figuration globally because of what happened to Muslims and Jews in Spain and because of what happened to indigenous people and Black kin and siblings in the context of Turtle Island. And we could sit down and unravel a little bit of that some more. But my experience really speaks to a chilling effect that is unfolding within the academy. We can say that it began Wednesday, April 17th, 2024, when President Shafiq, president of Manu Shafiq, president of Columbia University, sat during the congressional hearings and was being questioned by Congress, like Rep. Elise Stefanik of New York, about me. I was actually at the encampment at the time, prior to the arrest, the vicious arrest by the NYPD of my students, and I can't really unsee that. Insofar as the chilling effect, it extends though beyond me, beyond the academy. I would argue that it extends to workplaces, to factories, to hospitals, schools, to the general public. And it says basically that if you choose to dissent, you will be punished and publicly humiliated. Your personal information will be discussed online by power structures in the US, elsewhere. And so when it extends to non-academic and governmental actors, it means that you'll be exposed to character assassinations, death threats, like the ones that I'm receiving almost daily now. Many character assassinations that happened during the Black Spring, Michael Brown, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, and so on. The Columbia, particularly Shafiq and the Congressional Committee's behavior towards me is part and parcel of a larger national trend. Beyond McCarthyism, I would argue extends to Islamophobia, anti-Arab and anti-Muslim targeting, punishing, repressing students, faculty, of everybody, right? Especially Palestinian Arabs and Muslims. For speaking out with regards to Palestine, for speaking out with regards to the ongoing genocide, for speaking out in terms of criticism of Israel. And taking a principled stance against the occupation of Palestine and the ongoing occupation and genocide in Gaza. The fact of the matter is, President Shafiq, when she was confronted by Congress, insofar as me, and number one, she lied or willfully deceived Congress about the fact that when I was hired, like I said, I was hired in May, I was not hired in October, as she stated, of this year. Number two, she lied about the fact that she did not engage in fact-checking insofar as what I actually said, because I had written, I have spoken, I'm somebody who writes on, as you noted, Islam and anarchism, but yes, I support the resistance. However, I have concerns, ethical, political, spiritual concerns, because I work within the realm of political theology. I do not tolerate queerphobia, sexism that do not exist within sort of, and I hate using this word because it's in Orientalist terms, Islamist formations or so-called political Islam. Any idea is inherently political. But that queerphobia, that sexism, any kind of authoritarianism, it exists on the left, it exists on the right. It's not unique to quote unquote Islamists, right? And so I was misquoted, and that was a second lie. Shafiq did not engage in fact checking, and she lied about the fact that I was terminated. I have not been terminated up until this moment. I never received any notification from the upper administration. I'd also suggest that, in fact, in the last 2 weeks, I've been holding my course at the encampments with the students. So what we see, basically, in summary, is a committee that is a sham. It's a kangaroo court. Where U.S. tax dollars, are used to fund a genocide, where Colombia's investments are used to fund a genocide, as opposed to focusing on the elevated rate of homelessness in the U.S., education, healthcare, the condition of streets, of neighborhoods that are gentrified. So I'll leave it at that for now, and but that's broadly speaking what I've been subjected to, and yeah, happy to continue the conversation.
Mariam, do you want to go first?
I mean,
You're
I think
muted.
that summarizes so many different.
Oh, sorry, you're not muted. Sorry, there was just a delay.
Sorry, I think. No, I was just going to say, I mean, thank you so much, Mohamed, for kind of explaining how your particular case is situated within these multiple histories that are occurring at the same time, and how these histories are connected geographically, institutionally, kind of politically, theologically, kind of like how these arguments are being formulated across these very intersections. I think now we're going to kind of turn to a little bit of a question-answer kind of conversation around the particular cases. And so I think with Jody, I think one of the things is you've been at Hobart William Smith for such a long period. Have you ever encountered anything like this before? Have you experienced or witnessed kind of other examples of this? And how do we kind of situate your particular experience of being targeted within these broader histories as Mohammed?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So in 2020, there was an effort by local Republicans to get me fired, and the basis of that was a faked, photoshopped kind of meme graphic that made it seem like I was really calling for the burning down of all police stations. It was taken out of context, and it was actually part of an assault on a comrade of mine who is an elected city government official. And so these things got intertangled, and there was an effort, all sorts of messages sent to the provost and president of Hobart and William Smith colleges to get me fired, and even letters to the editor of the newspaper, which seems strange, but it's a small town. And the provost calls me and correctly says, we've received these, we're not going to do anything, we just thought you should know. Now, I think a better one would be to say, we're going to fully defend you because you have every right to, and you've been mischaracterized. But they did the bare minimum of, you're a tenured professor, there's nothing that we're going to do about that. So that's one similarity. But what's so different now is the extremely public nature of an attack that literally focuses on one word in the piece, and it's the word exhilarating. And it's as if nobody reads any further than that word exhilarating. And of course, it's a refusal to acknowledge that for millions and millions of people around the world, seeing people stand up against siege, occupation, oppression, 75-year Nakba, the colonization, that of course that's going to be an inspiring experience. I mean, many people have written importantly and beautifully about that. And that feeling is not the same thing as a celebration of killing at all, but it's equated with that. And it's equated with that in a ways that makes it impossible to understand how an oppressed people will rise up and wants to rise up, and why that's meaningful for people. And so it's been deeply maddening and frustrating to have one word taken out of context and misrepresented. And I also think that it's gave me a lot better sense of what scholars of Palestine and Middle East studies scholars have endured for many years. These prohibitions on what people can think and what they can say, and now we see a prohibition even on what you can feel, because only there's a very restricted realm of feeling that's allowed. And we see how all too many scholars feel like they have to be completely circumspect and make sure that they skirt around these issues. And it's hard. Many are brave and they get punished for it. And we're seeing this realm of punishment of people who tell the truth about Palestine, who speak out against a genocide. It's spreading now. It's spreading beyond a field where people are much more familiar with the phenomenon. But I think that's a sign of the general weakness now of the Zionist position, that it's breaking down, and that we should actually be sort of optimistic that now, because so many people are speaking out about Palestine, we're in a new moment. And so there's some rupture, there's some of us are going to get taken down a bit during this initial moment, but because of the work of people who've come before us, and because of the incredible bravery of all the students right now, and the work of forums such as this, the moment's changing.
Mohammed, can we
wanted to kind
ask?
of pull out. Sorry,
So do you wanna go ahead with a follow up?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up or just kind of highlight two things that Jody spoke to that really kind of like resonated with me. One was the way that, these are two very different institutions that both of you are located in, right? Between Hobart William Smith being a liberal arts college and Columbia University being this kind of, Ivy League university in the metropolitan area, very different kind of locations. And I think the particularities of like the liberal arts college really resonate with me, because previously to American University, I was at Hamilton College, and Hamilton College is similarly kind of located in a very rural kind of area. And so, the networks within those areas are kind of like play out in a very particular way. And so I think that aspect of it, and how all of these campuses, regardless of where they're located, are having this confrontation with this repression, and that the repression is showing up within each university in particular ways, is something to kind of, to think about further. And I think the other thing that you said was this kind of, focus on on one word, and kind of the meanings that are being, construed and produced around that one word, and kind of erasing all of these other kind of narratives that are circulating. And of course, these are the narratives that students are receiving and responding to, and speaking directly to people in Gaza, right, through their protests and encampment, and this way of telling people to be circumspect, of constantly disciplining what you can say, such that even as now we're seeing this, full-on assault on college campuses, there is still sometimes this hesitancy from so many professors to kind of speak up, and the ways that we've been kind of disciplined by these institutions, wherever they are. I think I just wanted to, appreciate that point and highlight how that is particular to like the higher education industry. It plays out in other industries in different ways, but there's something that that kind of I wanted to appreciate and amplify. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariam and Jody. Mohammed, do you want to address this question before I ask you my other question, which is something that everybody's is wondering about, which has to do with the hearing. But first, since you've been, in this circuit, in this academic realm for some time, have you ever experienced anything like this before, whether you personally or people around you? Or anything of this, anything similar beyond the usual concern about how we teach the region or the Palestine-Israel question, which usually conforms to international law and so on. But anything out of the ordinary that you've seen in the past that comes even close to what you are experiencing or witnessing?
Thank you for that, Bassam. The short answer is no. Not even at Cornell, in which I was very active in terms of organizing Indigenous Palestinian, Black Palestinian, social movements, sort of events, roundtable speaker series on these precise topics, on these intersections, on these conjunctions from intellectual, from movement perspectives. I am an organizer fundamentally, right? As much as I am an intellectual as well. Certainly not a careerist that way, but yeah, no, that's the short answer. But I think, and I believe that the reason that it is heightened in the moment right now is what Palestine echoes. How Palestine, if we truly listen to her, what it is that she has to share and tell us of certain entwined histories. And forgive me, beyond 48, beyond 1917, in the context of, again, for me personally, and so far as my own work, 1492. And it speaks to the very Orwellian moment, just to touch on what Mariam and Jody certainly had raised, in which we live, in which words and their meanings, as Orwell had written in 1984, have been usurped. Axis of evil, war against terror, simulated drowning insofar as torture. Civilians killed are referred to as casualties of war. River to the sea, as a call to genocide. Intifada, and so on. And this is quite crucial insofar as the liberal magnanimous order, because I'd like to extrapolate outwards for a moment, if you will. Because we should be able to live together in a world in which our faith, or the lack of faith thereof, can exist in a foray in which we can actually have dialogue to sort out our differences, to sort out our conflicts, to sort out our grievances. And the goal is, I would imagine, is to build a better world for our children. And what more than supposedly the safest place, right, insofar as the academy, right, a place of learning. And not just education, because again, I'm using the verb learning because education suggests that we submit ourselves to somebody to educate us, which, while true, but I prefer the word learning because it's a verb that suggests that we're learning with our students, we're unsettling with our students, but nonetheless a space that is a site of resistance, not a site of liberation, a side of survival, not thriving, and there's a difference between that, or those two, in which our children and us can exchange or engage in the free exchange of ideas. Our children, is Mohamed Abdou, who describes that come from immortality and are the heirs that we shoot towards infinity. What could be more precious than that? This becomes the question, right? And our children who have the ability, as is being proven vis-a-vis these encampments, right, to dream dangerously, beyond the horizons, the insecurities, the fears, the entanglements that adults have in relationship to careers, institutions, what can be imagined, what is possible and what is impossible. And particularly for Black, Indigenous, people of color, right? This is about Wadi al-Fayoum, the 6-year-old who was stabbed in Plainfield, Illinois, 21 times by his landlord who used to play with him. This is about Hind Rajab. Now it's Hind Hall, that was named after Hind Rajab, formerly Hamilton Hall, the frightened 6-year-old Palestinian girl who was murdered while she hid alone in a car alongside with paramedics who sought to rescue her. And the question is, and it's a legitimate question, right? All this for what? For a real estate corporation like Columbia to protect its badly managed assets? With regards to Lockheed Martin, Heiko, BlackRock, Google, Microsoft, and its dual degree program with Tel Aviv University. What is this? One shudders to think, and there's one say that this dystopian outrage at protests as opposed to an ongoing genocide. Have they no decency? Because unfortunately, this is the condition now. Because people in power, including institutions, certainly, as the ones that Jody and I and many of us are at, are part of the architecture of animosity. They benefit from, again, strife, from disagreement, from the weaponization of language, and our current moment to magnify precisely the rifts, our differences, at the expense of what brings us together, right? And that includes Netanyahu, that includes Congress, that includes the president of Colombia. That's what they're doing. And the mainstream corporate media is part of this architecture, the manufacturing of dissent and collective dissidence, right? And the task becomes like, how do we educate? How do we cover meanings and words that are even feeble and fickle in terms of what it is that they accomplish, right? And the power that they wield, that they hold, right? How do we organize? How do we build solidarity amongst one another? How do we care for our children? And how do we connect oppressed people globally, from Palestine to Kashmir to Black siblings in Turtle Island indigenous communities here and elsewhere? To me, that becomes the question, insofar as why this moment now, why I personally, for me at least, haven't confronted this before, and the degree of viciousness, again, and ramifications insofar as my specific targeting, in terms of calling to question something like the American dream. How can we contend and deal and point with a monster far away, insofar as settler colonialism, a legitimate term, a conceptual term, an intellectual term, discursive term, and not deal with the monster here, ostensibly speaking, insofar as settler colonialism here, conquistador invasions, Columbus, and the legacy of that here, land back here. Why is that so controversial? Why can't we have that discussion over language? And again, from an informed position of knowledge, not simply from haphazard opinions.
Okay, let me thank you, Muhammad. I know a lot of this is loaded. There's so much to talk about, everything we are saying, and so much to say about it. I would like to ask you a question about the hearing, if it's okay, which was, I think, one of the moments in U.S. history that will be marked for a sort of, I'm not sure what to call it, whether it's a witch hunt or a moment of transfer and transition and shift from something we used to, at least in part, believe about the rule-based order in the United States, even if it was not, even if we didn't have illusions about its real nature and real extent. It was a serious departure. The actual hearing was a serious departure for so many people who were watching from what we thought we knew about what is possible. And you, among others, were stars in that hearing. And my question to you is, why do you think you were in particular targeted, along with a couple other people, but you were targeted pretty hard? And if you can tell us a little bit about that, and what was your reaction as you were watching, whether live or otherwise?
Thank you, Bassam. I never wanted this. I never coveted the limelight, nor have I sought to be the center of attention. And I wouldn't wish what it is that I'm confronting, which is not exceptional. I'm not exceptional. If I have something to offer, it's ostensibly vis-a-vis the mentors, the students, the movements that have taught me so much over the course of decades. There were active efforts in and by faculty and students, given, again, my interdisciplinary expertise that I'll emphasize I was hired for as a job to do, to actually keep me and extend my stay here at Columbia. And the idea, again, was to torpedo that, to nuke that. My entire career, my entire life, everything that I worked so hard for, insofar as scholarship, insofar as what made me a threat, is 25 years of organizing experience, from Tahrir to the Zapatistas to abolitionist collectives, queer feminist, land defending with the Mohawks, since I became a settler of color to Canada at the age of 16, 17 in 97, 98. And my calling to question, again, the veneer of the brochure of Colombia as the veneer of the idea of the American dream, right? Because the brochure says that come to Columbia, an Ivy League school, a multicultural liberal institution, which you can engage with different students from so many myriad different backgrounds, different languages, and being able to cast doubt on that. Again, not only the legitimacy of that idea as it's presented, but also the feckless profiteering and the intersections and confluence between institutions, academic, as well as apparatuses of the state, corporations, their intersections. The fact that I'm dealing with political theology, that I'm discussing how, in a certain sense, Islam has become a quintessentialized other, particularly when indigenous land defenders and water protectors in the context of No Dakota are referred to as jihadi terrorists, and Black Lives Matter protests are referred to as Black extremist groups, a third to a fifth of the transatlantic slaves being Muslims from the Arabian Peninsula and the west coast of Africa, Muslims and Jews being referred to as savages and heathens, that being cast on indigenous people. Columbus defining the weapons that the Taino people had been using as alfanjis, the Spanish term for scimitars, which is the weapons that Muslims had used against the Crusaders, bringing to attention the fact that Hernan Cortez had referred to Aztec women as Moorish women, Aztec temples as Moorish mosques, referred to the Aztec leader Montezuma as a sultan. The New World is built in the image of the old, bringing to attention manifest destiny, doctrines of discovery, calling to question secularism, in God we trust on the dollar bill, a society that is built on Protestant conceptualizations of common law property, Victorian notions of gender and sexuality. And hence emphasizing, is there not an ongoing genocide that is happening here? Are there no, again, afterlife to slave projects that are very much manifesting still? Or have we moved on from the Black Spring and No Dakota and Tahrir and Occupy? It seems like we're shopping around for solidarities, but that's a different question. But also in the sense of talking about the difference between mobilization and organization, because what I've been teaching my students, as Kwame Ture had noted, organization is about understanding structure. So that means it's not a matter of just millions out on the streets. Because right now that's the nature of mobilization. In a certain sense, you have conservative Muslims that are against critical race theory, that are queerphobic, etc., right next to anti-Zionist Jews, right next to queer Muslims, right next to Islamophobic and anti-spiritual, anti-religious leftists. And they're all screaming free Palestine. But what is it? They're all projecting their ideological inclinations of what a free Palestine might mean without actually organizing their differences between them. Organizing is about understanding structures, dreaming dangerously, establishing alternatives. That's what makes me, in a certain sense, a target, right? Saying things like, look at what the Panthers did. Free breakfast programs, schools. They were keen on creating alternatives. Mistakes that there were there in terms of misogyny or hierarchy or queerophobia and so on and so forth that has been analyzed by so many movement scholars, calling attention to movements as the Zapatistas and Chiapas and the alternative world that they incepted since December 21st in 1994. That degree of radicality, that's what makes sort of the certain politique, ostensibly, that, again, I was hired for, but that is scary to the dominant order, to the world of the above, frightful. It constructs me as a monster. And the irony that Shafiq had engaged in is that she joined forces, because I'm so sure Shafiq on a certain level is perfectly fine with the EI sort of cultures, as much as we've certainly critiqued those from sort of a leftist perspective, insofar as the limitations and what Glenn Coulthard, Ian Simpson, Frantz Fanon, Charles Taylor referred to as a politics of recognition, of assimilation into the states, in a certain sense, and becoming sort of black, brown, and red-skinned folks with white masks that are just conscripted into the settler colonial order in the context of the U.S. But also, in so doing, and being ostensibly supportive of DEI, she actually joined forces with right-wing folks as Stefanik, who were not too long ago are very much aligned with those white supremacists, and still perhaps is aligned, who are walking around in Charleston yelling, "Jews will not replace us." They are now using the vehicle of Palestine to attack queer studies, to attack trans, to attack ethnic studies. And this will continue. They're setting the stage for the return of Agent Orange, Trump, ostensibly in November. This is ostensibly what I believe, I hypothesize, makes me a visible target and threat, besides my identities, my belongings, the way that I critique liberal identity politics, and so on.
Thank you, Mohammed. I know this was very difficult to endure. I think, unfortunately, from the looks of it, and we're bombarded by the reports everywhere that what we are seeing is the shape of things to come, and one wonders whether the summer will be a lull or the quiet, like a lull that is somewhat permanent, or the quiet before the storm. Almost, regardless of what transpires in Gaza, whether it is the impending invasion of Rafah or otherwise, and perhaps even the region. Absent that, even if the dust settles, so to speak, and the killing en masse stops, one wonders what is in store for all of us in the academic field. All right. Jody, if I may ask you, and this is going to be also something that perhaps Mariam will address with Mohammed, if you can tell us a little bit more about the reaction of students and faculty around you when news about your situation surfaced, and since.
Yeah, initially, I think people were just shell shocked. It was just unbelievable. The students were just completely, like, really shell shocked by getting these emails on a Saturday afternoon, and then Sunday, because our local AAUP branch immediately sent a letter on, I guess it was the day after this happened, either 1 or 2 days after, and then more letters started coming in, like from the national AAUP, and then Mesa had a letter, and so it was really these were very helpful. So, but at first, like, the students were just stunned, and a number reached out personally, and then and I think the same with most faculty. Like, it was just like impossible to believe that this was happening. um like it's just like it just seems so weird. But then pretty quickly, within over the course of the next week, people mobilized, and the students wrote a collective letter to the administration, and they made it public. And then a group of faculty, not all faculty, I've got to be clear, many faculty feel extremely intimidated by what's happened, no doubt. Right, it's a very scary situation, but a number of very brave faculty wrote and signed a letter. Faculty committees wrote and signed a letter. Um, and then on the sort of larger professional front, some comrades and colleagues put together an international letter, which got quite a lot of signatures to address the president of the colleges to call for my reinstatement. And there have been many really wonderful letters from alumni, students, other colleagues to the president to say, like, this is ridiculous. This is no matter what. Some of the letters are like, I hate everything she writes, but you shouldn't but you've got to reinstate her. This is clear violation. This is like viewpoint discrimination 101, right? Because I was relieved because of what I said about Palestine, what I said about Palestinian liberation. That was it. Right. One word applied to October 7th, a word that marks a sense of the freedom that Palestinians long for and strive for. That's what it was. It was very clear viewpoint discrimination about speaking up in solidarity with Palestine. And speaking out politically, like one of the things that I've noticed at HWS and other campuses, not just liberal arts, but maybe I wonder if it's more on liberal arts, but it's that the way that you're allowed to talk about Palestine is as a humanitarian crisis. And you're allowed to talk about it if you talk about every student in the room's feelings about everything, so that the issue is either an issue of therapy and making every person in the room feel okay. Though I've got to say, honestly, I don't think this is usually extended to brown and Muslim kids. Like, to be really honest, like it seems like that's the language, but it really, the kind of solidarity and comfort officially seems very, very limited. But at any rate, the official language is therapeutic, or it's humanitarian, and sometimes it's religious, as in we have to think about a 3,000-year religious conflict. And the way I write about everything is politically, and when things, particularly when relations between an oppressor and oppressed are at stake, it ends up becoming a situation where you've got two sides. And people don't like to think, particularly people in liberal arts environments, don't want to think that way. Like everybody has a critique of binary thinking, but I think the politicization of it was what was really what makes a number of people uncomfortable. But many people are like, even if we're uncomfortable, it doesn't matter. This is free and protected speech. She should be reinstated, and then you deal with this in an academic way. So there's been a lot of support, and we actually are having a this Saturday we're having a forum, free speech for a free Palestine, speak truth to power. And actually, I think Mohamed and Bassam will be participating, and so we're very excited about that. And we have a lot of local activist leaders coming. So there's been, yeah, I think that people are rallying, and that's really great.
Thank you, Jody, for kind of laying out the way that students responded, and faculty and colleagues, and kind of the response that generated from this very particular form of like targeting at your institution. I also wanted to kind of think a little bit about this binary thinking, this kind of both sidesism, this kind of like lock that it seems that kind of, we have in terms of like any political debate is always situated as a both sides issue. And then the student's education then becomes in some ways like how to approach everything as a both sides issue, right? And that's, I'm sure all of us kind of like experience that in classes where you're trying to kind of, talk about a larger systemic process and kind of explain how it historically has played out, et cetera. But it kind of keeps coming back to that. And I'm one of the critiques I think that I had of Hamilton College was to talk about it as a centrist arts college. Because in some ways, like that's a kind of way that, we're kind of orienting towards everything being, even this being like pro-genocide and anti-genocide. I think Ilhan Omar gave an interview, I think, while she was visiting Columbia, where she specifically says, like we want all students to engage with what's happening in the world, whether they are taking this position, on genocide or not. But at the same time, I think even using some of this language, right? Genocide has become kind of like the G word in a lot of academic spaces where, we'll talk about mass killings, which again, there are things that are indisputable at this point. But these kind of debates over semantics, of course, are not about semantics, but about all this kind of all these other things, all these other processes that we're all kind of situated in, implicated in, given where we're located, with regards to the institution. And I think, this other piece that you highlighted again, like is how the students have responded. I wanted to now kind of turn to Mohamed, because I know you've been teaching actually at the encampment at Columbia, and really kind of, engaging with students in a way that's connecting all of these things with regards to what they're doing in the classroom and how they're taking that learning, as you said, specifically learning, not thinking of it as education, but as this praxis that we're all engaged in. And that can be located in many different places. And so kind of, if you could tell us about how students have have responded to what you've been dealing with, and their support, and kind of how are you moving forward, or how are you kind of navigating this moment, given it's all very recent, of course.
Thank you, Mariam, for your question. The students have been my beacon of light, my hopes, my dreams. They are my heart, and I can't live without my heart. They are my spine. They are ostensibly the whip of a tongue that I use to speak truth to power. And my journey with them, as I said to them at the beginning, my responsibility is, I'm not ideological. My responsibility, I focus on ethical, political, spiritual commitments that inform or should inform identities. It makes no difference to me, as I say to them, that one identifies as queer or as Muslim or as Black or as Jewish. I mean, you could be Muslim and Zionist, and there are plenty of those nowadays, right? So my sense of community is defined by the ethical, political commitments and ostensibly spiritual commitments. And that's a way, as we were discussing in class, on queerness, on feminism, on BIPOC understandings of queerness and feminism from decolonial abolitionist perspectives, to unravel the false binaries that exist in the world, right? That assumes that there's symmetrical relations. But these binaries exist and manifest in many different forms. As I say to them, well, let us think about the context of how religion is excluded from the conversation, right? And I think with regards to Palestine, with regards to 1492, because this is not a war between Muslims and Jews, as we discovered together. It's a war that Muslims and Jews have been conscripted into vis-a-vis white supremacist conceptualizations of Christianity that was usurped underneath Constantine and weaponized as an imperial tool for conquest, right? Christianity is originally an Eastern tradition. But then that image has been projected onto Islam and the manifestation of Wahhabism and the manifestation of ostensibly even Muslim Brotherhood thought onto Judaism in the form of Zionism. How can we pierce through these binaries, a liberal progressive Islam, a conservative Islam? How can we be critical of a Zionist Wahhabi crusading alliance on the one hand, while also be critical of, Russian totalitarian statist regimes, if you will? How can we be critical of the mullahs in Iran, the rights of women to dress as they see fit, while at the same time not feeding into imperialism? Right? And imperialist adventurism and conquest and so on, about strategy, about tactic, about organizing, about mobilizing. And it's in these unfolding conversations that they are the bravest folks that I know. And I wish that as adults, I'm not a parent, but ostensibly, should I become someday, I would certainly be proud of their bravery, of their audacity, of their pushing the emblem, of their refusing to compromise over values that inform their lives, and the sense of self-sacrifice that they placed everything on the line, their bodies, their lives, their careers, their names, their reputations, and ostensibly even expose their own families to risk, to harm. And this is what becomes beautiful. They've gotten me things like plants, written cards. They've vied, they fought for me, and it's the least that I could do is to stand alongside them, to fight for them as well, to share their hopes, their dreams. I had a student at the encampment yesterday that came to me, when Manoush said that there will be no divestment from Israel, and he said, "I'm feeling pretty hopeless at this point. Are there any words that you have to say to me?" And I couldn't but say, well, look at what you've built. Insofar as a different society. Those again are the beacons of wonder. I've had also students, point at me, photograph me. You're the Hamas supporter. I've had 2 Zionist students follow me into the encampment last week. One said to the other, Abdu, you're the Hamas supporter, terrorist supporter. Professor, how do you feel about the fact that my friend here is a former IOF soldier that killed Palestinians? As if to solicit a reaction out of a brown man, a Muslim man, because of course that would be headline news that they want to get on camera. I've been undercover recorded by students. So there's this and there's that. But one chooses to focus on the positive, on the will, like I said, and the great deal of inspiration that our children are offering. And I hope we can really seriously stand beside them. Again, as we grow, we tend to feel more risk, become more afraid. But this is a time to be emboldened by their fearlessness. May I extend on that just one thing?
Sure.
In terms of just, I think because of what it is that I said, and just to give like a little bit perhaps of concrete action, because we're problematizing, but to also give action, we need as communities, as peoples, to get to the streets. We need to get our neighborhoods. We need to really be able to support these student movements that are demanding a free Palestine, and that involves BIPOC communities, because it's really happening now, and there's a danger and that I fear of this becoming another moment. And that's what I'd ask us all to sit down and think about and reflect. I'm sure we already are, but to take really seriously, how do we mobilize our communities, our neighborhoods, beyond the academy in support of these students? Because they are our children.
Yes, and this is where we would like to go to next. But before I do that, let me just share that this is our third installment. We're going to have another installment next week with Maya Wind and Sarah Lahmoud on the question of academic freedom and feminist mobilization in Israel, and the firing and arrest of Nadira Shalhoub. And this will take place next week, and we will be announcing it. In the meantime, let me share that the previous conversations we've had were with Jairo Funes and Maura Finkelstein at first. Then we spoke with Danny Shaw and Lisa Hoffman Kuroda, and now we are honored to be speaking with more folks that have been targeted, including, of course, Jodi Dean and Mohamed Abdou. This event and this series is organized by the DC, Maryland, and Virginia Faculty for Academic Freedom and the Gaza and Context Collaborative Project, and co-sponsored by the MESA, Middle East Studies Association, Task Force on Civil and Human Rights, also by MESA's Committee on Academic Freedom, and the Faculty for Justice in Palestine Network, which includes more than 150 chapters nationwide. So with that, let me move to the last question, because we shared this will be an hour, and we always lie because there's always a lot to talk about. So the last question is, this is the first time that we're holding this conversation while the actual student encampments and, frankly, the heroics of the students, notwithstanding all of the smearing by the mainstream media. And we could go on and on about this, and we will actually address this in a future conversation. How do you, how has that affected you, Mohamed and Jody? How has the observation of students taking matters into their own hands, being unwavering in the demands they're making? And of course, a lot of people don't understand why they're making these demands, as if the United States is not bankrolling the genocide in Gaza, and as if their universities are not actually investing in various forms of unlawful investment practices in Israel, not notably also in illegal settlements and so on and so forth. How has this encampment paradigm affected you and affected your position and the way you might move forward? So let's start with Jody.
It just made me completely hopeful. It makes me completely hopeful because it feels to me like the web of lies and hasbara and propaganda and upside down world has just been ruptured, and that these are basically encampments for truth. And that might seem a little bit cheesy or naive, but I don't it doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like here are places where the students are telling the truth, they're demanding the truth, they are demonstrating against the ways that US institutions are deeply implicated in the genocide, and they're calling for an end to it. And they're building from the decades of work of BDS. That's amazing. That also shows that all of that work really established deep roots and now is kind of bearing fruit, to keep that metaphor going. And I think it's just like in many ways, this itself is a kind of victory. And we don't know exactly what the shape is going to look like. We don't know what how bad the reaction is going to continue to be. But we've had students now that they're moving to this other phase of occupying more buildings. I think they're led by, what is it, Caltech or Cal Poly Humboldt, which is just amazing. And so I think there's a new university that's possible that they're bringing into being, and a new ability to speak the truth about Palestine, speak the truth about imperialism, and actually produce something much, much better. So it gives me a lot of hope, like no matter what happens in my own personal situation.
You know, masks are off, as Jody had noted. America's leading this war, right? Israel is but an instrument in its arsenal. Ultimately, one only has to go back to sort of the Shoah and how America had sent back boatloads of Jews vis-a-vis, the example of the USS St. Louis. So it's not like America particularly cares for Jewish people. The students leave us in awe, but what the dominant order has incepted, what the settler institution, insofar as the academy has incepted, is an unsafe space that threatens the lives of Jewish and non-Jewish students, and this needs to be understood, Muslims, Arabs, and otherwise, who are defiant against the attempted silencing of their dissent. And as Dr. Karvokian, that you had mentioned, Bassam, and I'm glad that inshallah Sarah and Maya will be discussing her. She posited an important question. What does it mean that academic institutions, and we need to build alternatives to these institutions, what does it mean, though, for these academic institutions to align themselves with the settler state, to have their policies, their memorandums, what it is that's taught, what it is that students are exposed to, dictated by the settler state? I mean, institutions are supposed to be the sites of research, of intellectual inquiry, attentiveness to details, and yet, again, we're seeing this neutralization, this normalization of universities, of schools, of mosques, of churches, bombed, all facets of life in Gaza destroyed, and they attempt to do the same with regards to here. And not only that, but to infantilize our youth, who are literally seeing truth unfold before their very eyes, a very, live stream genocide. But this is where, I get them to think, okay, what does it mean to be scrolling through genocide on phones that are made of copper and cobalt mined from another genocide, insofar as, the Congo? Right? It's the interconnectivity of these struggles. If you have an anti-Semitism task force, and we need to talk about anti-Jewishness because Arabs and Semites are Semites too, but besides the point, why are we not having an Islamophobia task force? Because to me, Islamophobia is inherently sort of, again, ingrained within US foreign policy, domestic policy, the secret black site prisons for Muslims, FBI sort of surveillance of mosques and not necessarily synagogues, the scaremongering with regards to Sharia law vis-a-vis state legislators, its outright banning that doesn't happen with Talmudic law, and so on and so forth, right? Hate crimes insofar as Muslim students, Arab students, Palestinian students, and this is not to take away. This is why we're seeing conjunctively the rise of anti-Jewish as well as anti-Muslim and anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian crimes, to put it delicately. And students are at the core heart of, again, not only taking action, but also deliberating over this conjunction of forces, over what it means to engage in understanding the intent, purpose, and action that we're living on stolen land. How do we situate ourselves, our positionality, and how to forthrightly demand what it is that we all should be demanding, to be quite fair and honest at this moment in time. And I think that's what becomes, again, very vital and crucial for us to support. We need to end the sham of these congressional hearings in so many different ways, to demand that the US House Committee, all the university presidents, the law enforcement, to get their hands off our students and professors, of course, in addition to divestment and so on and so forth. But we need to insist on these demands, given the lies on the congressional floor, the suspensions, the over-policing, the calling in of not only the NYPD, but the National Guard as well on our kids. And this is what we should be contending with and fighting for, in addition to obviously investigating, real anti-Jewish sentiment, real Islamophobic sentiments that is being portrayed across US campuses and beyond.
Mariam, do you have any last words or questions you'd like to ask? I'll give you the floor in just a second. We have a few questions that we kind of addressed for the most part. One of them has to do with whether this targeting is restricted to adjunct and contract-based faculty, and whether it touches the tenured professors. It actually started with the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, with the adjunct faculty, but it has, as we have seen during the hearings, it's touching everyone. And I don't think the way to respond and address this is to simply be defensive. I think it's important for there to be a campaign, which we are seeing underway, to assert the right to academic freedom and to unravel and disentangle and disintertwine the claims being made regarding anti-Zionism being anti-Semitism automatically. So these efforts are underway. Even this conflation is becoming less and less efficacious in the eyes of so many people, because obviously when you look at the content of what people are saying and you realize that it's simply the critique of the policies of a particular state and how that critique is being interpreted as anti-Semitic, I mean, it's ludicrous, and this is the sort of thing that I think we will be seeing more of, and you could almost see a concerted effort moving the discourse from one target and one talking point, big talking point with corollaries to another talking point. So we will be addressing all of this, but and I'm hoping that you all will be joining us in the future. We plan to speak with a number of students as early as this week about what we are witnessing. And at some point, we are also going to have these roundtables with students and faculty. So with that, I'll give the final word to Mariam.
I mean, thank you. I think my most important thing to say is just to say thank you to both Mohamed and Jody, and to all of the faculty who have joined us. I think when we started the series, the conversation was to make sure that people don't feel alone, because we have to stay committed, as Mohamed said, to this work. Whether we are occupying a position as a tenure track faculty member or as a professorial lecturer or something else down the line. I think, speaking for myself, I resigned from my position, specifically because I think one of my instincts at that moment was to try to write my own story with regards to this, because the institution isn't loyal. So one has to kind of think for yourself and manage that for yourself. And I think similarly for so many faculty who are speaking up right now, there is a loyalty to yourself, to your ethical commitments, to your moral and ethical kind of self, to the answers that you're going to give your students and your children. And I appreciate both of you for staying kind of, firm on that commitment and demonstrating and modeling what that commitment looks like. Because I think that's the other thing that we need, is to kind of have public examples of the commitment that people are practicing. and kind of connecting that to broader audiences that are also facing similar kinds of intimidation. I see that we lost Jody there, so thank you, Jody. But I just wanted to appreciate both of you very much, because I think having this conversation publicly is the thing that I missed when I was going through it, and I think that's critical right now to keeping this movement.
Shukran Bassam, shukran Mariam. It really was an honor, and Jody and Jody, tremendous honor. I'm very grateful to be with you all and to have been with you all, and inshallah, I look forward to building and dreaming those worlds together.
Thank you, Mohammed. I'm trying to find out if Jody is gonna come back to share with us her goodbyes, but I guess we will just have to finish here on our own. So there we go. All right. Well, again, I guess goodbye, Jody. I haven't heard from her. And thank you, Jody, and thanks, Mohammed, for persevering. And I'm sure we will hear from you further. We will be in touch with everyone we spoke with. Also, Mariam, thank you so much for bringing a lot of grace to this conversation and knowledge and experience based on your own difficulties and challenges that you've had when you were targeted. And at some point, we should address your case a bit more directly. Let me just say that this coming Monday, at 1 p.m. we will be having our fourth installment, and it will be of In Defense of Academic Freedom, and it will be addressing the question of academic freedom in Israel, and it will be with Maya Wind, who has written extensively precisely on this topic, the title of the book actually, and then with also Sarah Al-Hamoud. Nader Shalhoub was supposed to join us this week actually, along with Maya, but she was arrested, and she might join us in the future. But Maya and Sarah, who are in close touch with her, will be talking about her case and the broader context in Israel. Thanks to all who have joined us. Again, this is In Defense of Academic Freedom. This is the third installment, and we will continue speaking with folks that have been targeted and addressing the question of encampments in a similar series. Thanks to all, and hope you stay safe. Shukran كتير to everybody.
شكرا لكم. السلام عليكم. Shalom Aleichem to our Jewish siblings as well.